Thank you, Shani, and thank you all once again for coming out this evening, giving up your precious time. It is most appreciated, particularly in these sort of COVID times. Many of you I know are working from home. You're not in central London. In the olden days, it was thought, oh, central London location, everyone can pop in after work. But nowadays, many of you are working from home, and I know some of you have travelled a considerable distance. So thank you for that. It's a great pleasure for me to meet so many old and not so old faces. I'm not going to embarrass anyone, Tony Craighill, by particularly some of you've made a great effort, and I appreciate that. And we hope that to have something of interest for you this evening. And I'll start by explaining what this is all about. I've written a book, Rocking the Boat. One or two of you may be familiar with that fact. I haven't been shy in advertising the fact that I'm writing a book. So how did this all come about, and why? Fateful evening in Euston, southeast London, when 18-year-old Stephen and his friend were standing at a bus stop where they were approached by a group of white youths who were shouting racial slurs. Stephen's friend made good his escape, but Stephen was surrounded by the youths and stabbed twice. He attempted to run away but collapsed and bled to death near to the scene of the attack. The police investigation into the murder of Stephen Lawrence just beggared belief. The Metropolitan Police was world renowned for its professionalism and competence in bringing the perpetrators of many infamous and serious crimes to justice. Yet the Stephen Lawrence murder investigation was riven with such gross incompetence and negligence that some police officers I knew, both black and white, believed corruption and or racism must have been a contributory factor in the quite astonishing investigative oversights that had occurred. It's warm here, ladies and gentlemen. Following what was yet another shameful milestone in the Metropolitan Police's checkered relationship with London's black community, the Black Police Association had not hesitated in supporting Stephen's parents, Doreen and Neville, in their campaign for justice. The Lawrence's thank you letter remained proudly affixed to the Black Police Association's office notice board. It was common knowledge that Stephen's parents shared serious misgivings about the incompetent nature of their son's murder investigation and made an official complaint to the Police Complaints Authority, the PCA.
An extract and read more about it in the book. I now wish to invite Simon on stage. Most of you may know Simon, who is the former senior Home Affairs correspondent for Channel 4 News. He is someone who is robustly independent, who has done robustly independent reporting on home affairs, crime, police, terrorism, legal issues, immigration and race. He is responsible for award-winning films on terrorism, G20 protests, Stephen Lawrence, immigration and suicides in prison. If you can just put your hands together for Simon.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good. I have to, the chair is normally a neutral person, but I have to express a vested interest here, page 232, if you need a reference. Can I first of all ask, given the audience who haven't read it, are now on tenterhooks, what happened at your meeting with Mr. O'Connor?
Well, I don't want to spoil it, Simon. There are spoilers. What happened next triggered a chain of events that led to the issue, the debate around institutional racism being taken on board by the Stephen Lawrence inquiry that was in its very, very early stages of setting up. So it wasn't a difficult meeting in that we weren't shouted at. It was a difficult meeting in that we didn't have the answers to Mr. O'Connor's questions. And the reasons we didn't have the answers are articulated in the book. I think the fact that he was an assistant commissioner, I was an inspector, I was very kind of forthright in my views, having read Charles Hamilton and Stokely Carmichael, but when faced with assistant commissioner, that kind of assertiveness went out the window actually. And I remember sitting upright in my chair and So I mean, that's something about being a police officer, you know. It's a disciplined organisation. Rank is respected, regardless of what the other person might say. I must admit, I got to know Dennis O'Connor very well, and I think of him as a friend. And there were occasions when he said, forget the rank, Paul, forget the rank. How can you forget the rank? You're the assistant commissioner, I'm an inspector. You hold my life in your hands, effectively. So it was an interesting meeting, and I saw it as a challenge. And I took up that challenge, and I introduced other players onto the field who were able to assist me with what I believed was the right thing to do. And I don't want to spoil it by giving any more information
Fair enough.
of my career, and that the outcome of that interview stayed with me for the remainder of my career. Bearing in mind that interview,
Why did that? Why did it?
because everyone remembered me. Everyone remembered me for that. And no one ever spoke and said, that's the guy who said we're institutionally racist. No one ever said that, but you knew that it was there, lurking in the background. You knew that it was there in the way that you were never invited out to lunch. You knew that it was there in the way that you never invited to leaving dues. You knew that there were quiet pockets of conversation that you wouldn't be accepted into. So yeah, I describe it as like a disease, effectively, that I had to manage for the rest of my career. And I have absolutely no regrets. I had a great time on Newsnight. I spoke my mind, and I spoke my mind particularly because of Mike Bennett. And you're right. I mean, Mike Bennett was a dinosaur. You know, Mike was a police officer from the 1960s, and he held those views very close to his heart. You know, the views of a police officer that was recruited in the 1960s, and he tolerated black people, I'm sure. But the way he spoke to Neville Lawrence, and the way that he demanded an apology from the Lawrences on Newsnight, he demanded an apology for something they had said, and so that really got me on the edge of my seat. And yeah.
So do you think you became a victim of institutional racism?
No. This wasn't about me. I mean, we're all victims. Even the white officers, they don't believe it or they don't understand it. But if you work in an institution, the culture of that institution militates against you as an individual. We're all victims. We're all victims, because if you're white, you can't do the job that you're supposed to be doing with the talent that's available, because that talent is suppressed. You know, and we see it played out in the way investigations take place or don't take place, because many good officers from minority ethnic backgrounds are not given those opportunities or do not have the confidence to take on those opportunities. So we're all victims, as Londoners, we're all victims of institutional racism. Very important, because it introduced me to Andrew Billen, who might be here. Yep. He's here, from the London Evening Standard at that time, who interviewed me shortly after the Stephen Lawrence inquiry interview on Newsnight. And as a result, there was a huge spread in the London Evening Standard. And I talk about how that article actually helped me in many, many ways, because it was seen as a positive article. And I talk about meeting with Deputy Assistant Commissioner John Grieve on the day of that article, and John very kindly took me and my partner at the time out for a glass of wine. And that, to me, was hugely positive and helpful at a time when my colleagues in my workplace were effectively turning on me and saying,
I think it was you took me out.
Some of the book is about surviving the Met, if you like. You say, I would work harder, be smarter, get promoted, and hoist myself above the daily diatribe of racial rhetoric. So how hard was that?
as a PC, it's very difficult, but that was the outcome that I desired, because I felt at the time, I was proved wrong, I felt at the time if I could get above the ground floor, then I would be aloof from all of that nonsense that went on in the canteen and elsewhere, all those conversations, because I would be a sergeant, I would be a leader. So it's very important for me, and I was very focused and very driven, and I think driven because I needed to do that. It's something I needed to do for my own mental health, for my own sanity. I needed to get out of that daily kind of rhetoric-filled, racial slurs, environment that unfortunately.
But you walked the streets, you were in the stations, you were in bands, and it went on and on and on.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what it does to you.
I talk about coping mechanisms in the book, and it's something that we all embrace, sometimes unknowingly. When faced with a difficult situation, we kind of look to something that kind of acts as a balance to that situation we find ourselves in. And for me, it was kind of exaggerating a black persona, if you like, outside.
So it's not you.
Outside of the police. Outside. So I would step away from the police and I would involve myself. I would go to all the black nightclubs in London. I would be there. I was there. And that for me was the escape. It was escape. I needed to do that. I need to be fake. I need to do it kind of socialise with normal people and have normal conversations in a non-threatening environment. And that's how I perceived it. And that was my coping strategy. I can put up with all this at work. I have to if I want to progress through the organisation, up the ranks, which I did. But there has to be a way of retaining my sanity. And so how I did it was, one, I embraced kind of black society in London, and two, I travelled to the United States very regularly. I have African American heritage. I wanted to understand my African American side. And I found a cheap way of travelling to the United States, and I would go very, very regularly, and I would. And that was, if you want to Google it, that was Dean Parish. I'm on my way. I'm off to the city. Yeah.
So, it's now your turn. Anyone who, there's a roving microphone, so if anyone has questions, and I hope you all do, I have read the book twice, and it is fascinating. And the second time was a better read than the first time, because maybe I skimmed through it. The detail is astonishing. The photographic memory is astonishing in the book. So please welcome some questions, and please don't have to come through me. You can go direct to the author.
Hello, Paul.